When static crackles across the mic, and strange and pointless puns echo through your earbud, whenever your Wi-Fi flickers, and your connection is deathly still, this is the time when ghost stories are present, possessing this podcast with ghoulish delight. Welcome, foolish mortals, to episode 40 of the Epcotian Adventure. I'm Rod.
And I'm Sue.
And, oh, that's been in my voice all day long. That does so much better. Yes, excuse me there. Welcome to episode 40 of the Epcotian Adventure.
We've been waiting a while to do this one.
This one has been in the making for 30 years, believe it or not.
Pretty much. So today's episode is a little bit different. It's actually a lot different. We are going to share some ghost stories.
Ghost tales of the Magic Kingdom.
In the spirit of Halloween. As we've shared, we're not really Halloween people. It's not our favorite holiday, but we do enjoy a good ghost story.
Yeah, I think we put a wreath up for harvest, and that's really about it.
It's a beautiful fall wreath that our friend Steve's wife made for us, and it goes on the door every year. That's about it. But we do love handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. Does that count?
Yeah, that's Halloween here in those arcs, too. For a lot of people, is going to the Pumpkin Festival at Silver Dollar City, or doing trunk or treat at their local school or church or community organization.
Very popular. And I do enjoy putting Kaylee's Snow White costume on her, so...
She's a very cute Snow White.
She is.
So a little background, Sue and I actually did grow up in a haunted house.
Not an attraction. We didn't grow up at a theme park. But the house that we grew up in had some things that happened.
Some lively spirits.
Some interesting things that we never knew the other siblings had experienced until years and years later, and found out we all had very similar stories, none of which we will share with you today. So there's that.
They will, they'll make your hair stand on edge more than the stories we're about to tell. Now, a little bit of background. Back 30 years ago, when I was a cast member at Disneyland, my coworker and I, Colin, had started outlining a book that we were just calling Ghost Tales of the Magic Kingdoms. So some of the stories you're going to hear today are from an older reference point that have happened years or even decades ago. Some of the stories we're going to be talking about, or that you'll be hearing people actually talking about here in just a few moments, have happened over the last few years or the last few centuries. No, few decades. We're old, but no.
Yeah, this is going to be a very Rod-centric episode. You're going to hear him a lot because a lot of the stories are his own, things that happened to him over the years. And because of the book research that he and Colin did, he talked to these cast members one-on-one. So everything that you're going to hear today is either something that happened to one of us personally, or that we got from a first-hand reference. We didn't scour the internet. We didn't do a Reddit search. None of that. This is all stuff that we personally know and trust the people that they happen to, including ourselves.
Yeah, even Sue has some stories that we're going to relay.
A couple. I didn't work there as long as you did, so. And I never worked the really haunted attractions.
So let's talk about that. There have been stories from multiple attractions and multiple locations at Disneyland. All of the parks have their ghost stories. Are they real? You be the judge, but from what I'm going to be talking about today, as Sue said, a lot of the things you're going to hear me talk about are firsthand. This is interesting things that happened to me at the Haunted Mansion.
Now, you may not believe in ghosts. You may not believe that there is another spiritual realm out there. That's fine. Take it all with a grain of salt. Take it all just for entertainment value. Or just as some interesting Disney trivia. Because this is all just, stuff that happened. I personally think ghosts exist only because I think that there is a spiritual realm that lives side by side with the physical realm. And sometimes that veil gets a little too thin.
Especially with some of the things we saw at the house we grew up in. I'll just leave it at that.
So let's start it off with the most obvious of the choices. And that's going to be the Haunted Mansion. I mean, it's literally right there in the name, folks.
So I'm going to just start relaying some of these stories as they happened to me over the 9 years that I worked at the Haunted Mansion. All of the time I was there, I was a lead and trainer. So I knew every inch of that building. I had to, as part of my job, to not just know the attraction, but to know the inner workings of the attraction and to walk the attraction in the dark, in the light, before guests, with guests. So some of these happen with guests around. Most of these happened when I was alone in the mansion.
Now, a lot of these are just going to be a relaying of the facts that happen so that you can decide for yourselves what you want to believe. But because some of them are just short snippets, I'm going to ask you to just put yourself in the Halloween mood. Maybe dim the lights a little. Unless you're driving, don't do that. But dim the lights. Just get yourself into that sort of spooky spirit, ready for the season.
So the first story I want to talk about was working at Unload. This happened quite a few times to both me and if you talk to any cast member who's worked there for any length of time, they're going to tell you the Unload area at the Haunted Mansion is one of the spookiest, creepiest areas you can work in when there's nobody around. So at the Haunted Mansion, the Unload area is literally where you get off of the attraction. It's where the belt is that you see the cast member walking on. It looks like a mausoleum. You exit the vehicle and you head up the escalator and out into the park. So for a cast member standing there walking on that belt over and over and over all day long. There's a mirror that is in front of the cast member that's on the wall so they can see behind them towards the area where people are walking behind them headed towards the end of the ramp and up the up ramp. So a couple things that have happened there over the years when I worked there. So this happened to me a few times where I would be walking on the belt or I would be waiting off to the side and I would hear kids giggling or voices coming from inside the attraction as if they were coming just past the mirrors. So I would start walking on the belt and wait for the group to start getting up to where I was, only to realize I had been walking for now 10-15 seconds and there's nobody on the attraction. Now this has been reported by several cast members over the years where they hear kids giggling or just people talking and they will start waiting for the guests to come off and they just never come. There was actually one time, however, when I was just walking on the belt, waiting for the groups, looked out, saw people in the vehicles, heard them talking, looked down, waited a few seconds, looked back up, and there was nobody there. So, yeah. In that same vein, I was working the load area, which is where you get on the vehicles. Load 1 is the first person that's on the belt. Load 2 is at the end of the belt. When it's quiet, we would do what they call walking them down, which meant that the Load 2 person would go back to the elevator, go up, grab the next group, come back down. We would load them, then they would just repeat the cycle. That was used for very quiet days, which no longer exist at the Disneyland, apparently. But I'm working Load 1, and Load 2 person had gone to the elevator to walk them down. Normally what I would hear first is the spiel from the hallway. And then I would hear guests, and then I would see the guests, and Load 2 would come around, and we would start our loading process. One afternoon I was there, and it was a really quiet day, and I, again, heard voices from the portrait hall. Guests talking, chatting. Waited, nobody came around the corner. I walked myself around the corner, and there was nobody there. Now, voices, if you're familiar with the Haunted Mansion at Disney World, when you get to the top of the stairway, you hear voices or whispering. Disneyland down at the load area and the unload area does not have that in the background music. It's not part of something that you would hear. And as a cast member, we know every sound that's happening in that attraction at every position we work. So when something is different, it stands out. Well, this was definitely different because I heard a whole group of people talking and there was nobody there. One time something odd, very odd, happened with guests on the attraction. I'm unloading people at Unload, and I hear door 7, which if you look at the escalator at the exit area, on the left-hand side, you'll just see a black door. It just goes back into a hallway. Well, I heard it thunk, close. It doesn't latch, but I could hear it like hit the wood on the frame. And I kind of look over and I see what I think is a maintenance person. And I hear the gate to the mausoleum unlatch, open, and close. which would mean somebody was going to be walking right past me and headed in towards where the mirrors are, where there's another door right there. So I immediately am notified in my head, hey, somebody's headed into the attraction. So I look over and go, hey, we're running. There's nobody there. The mausoleum door opened and closed, made a very, very specific clank noise that I was very familiar with. But as the guests are getting off the attraction, I saw somebody come out the door and enter the mausoleum, but there was nobody there. Again, what was it? I don't know, but this maintenance person does show up again. We have a friend of ours, Stephanie, who recently was on the attraction. This is just in the last couple weeks. And I'll let Stephanie tell you what she saw.
So we're riding the mansion. We're in our dune buggy. And as we come into the hallway where the, you forgive me, I don't know the names of the rooms, where the casket is, where the open casket, where the figure is trying to get out.
Yeah, the conservatory.
The conservatory, thank you. And then just beyond it is the hallway of doors, where the doors are breathing and the doorknobs are turning. There's also in that little hallway, there's a lamp with a little table, like a little nightstand, with a book on it. And our dune buggy came to a stop at that point. And as it comes to a stop, I just happened to look at the back of the dune buggy in front of us. So the way we were facing, I'm looking at the dune buggy in front of us. And as I'm looking, I saw in sharp detail, I saw a figure cross between the two dune buggies. And I could even see the striped shirt and the embroidered patch that had the name on it. And I thought to myself, what is a maintenance worker doing in the middle of a show scene? And so I turned to get a full look at the maintenance worker, but there was nobody there. So even though it had already passed, there was no way he could have gone around me or gone behind me and I wouldn't have seen him. So he just wasn't there from one moment to the next. And that actually made me jump. So that happened, just a few weeks ago.
So yeah, this maintenance person, apparently this is somebody who is seen semi-frequently around the mansion. It's not one that I had heard from a lot of other cast members as something that had been seen. However, the fact that I have seen it and Stephanie has seen it makes me think that there's probably more people that have seen it than realize. Probably on cameras and other places within the mansion.
He shows up later in Space Mountain as well.
That is true. Okay, so here is probably the most creepy one that happened to me. And this is the one that made me, as a lead, decide that I was never going to walk the track by myself alone again. I was a lead one night, and we were walking them down, so there were big gaps in the ride for guests. There were places where there just was, 30, 40, 50 cars of no guests. So I get a call from the unload area that said, hey, a guest is here. They lost something in the attraction. I don't remember what it was. It was a purse or a wallet or something. So back then, this is before the closed ride area that OSHA or DOSH, which is the safety authority of attractions in California, has mandated that you can't be in a moving ride area now. But back then, we could take a flashlight, a little remote control, basically like a garage door opener, which would shut off the attraction if we pressed it, and a walkie-talkie. And so as the lead, I grabbed those things, headed into the ride with my flashlight, and started searching the track when there were no guests around. So I go through the seance circle, get up into the ballroom, and as I'm approaching the edge of the ballroom where there's a 90-degree turn in the walkway and heads into what's now the bride's room, which used to be the attic, it goes from a concrete slab with carpet to wood planking, because at that point the track is elevated because of the vehicle maintenance that's right there. So I heard somebody running on the wood planking. So I just turned my flashlight over towards the pathway because I didn't know how close they were and just pointed it at the pathway. So if it was a cast member, they would see me and stop and tell me why they're running through the attraction. Or if it was a guest, I could go, ha-ha, caught you! Whatever it was, rounded the corner, hit my shoulder and spun me around, and kept running. The only problem was, is there was nothing there. It was a cold blast of air, something that I could feel physically on my shoulder, and still hear the footfalls on the carpet running towards the seance circle. Yeah, I ran back through the attic, down the ramp, and out the door at the entrance of the cemetery, stood outside in the back and shook for about 10 minutes. Walked all the way around the show building, across the railroad tracks, back into the mansion, sat at my desk, and didn't move. And to this day, have no idea what that could have been. Now, an odd thing about that is we have another cast member named Dave who had the exact same thing happen to him. And Dave was kind enough to send me the information. He said, I was in the park with my girlfriend at the time, and we were chatting with the Unload cast member. Empty, no guests around. We finally left and started up the ramp, still with nobody around. When about halfway up, a big gust of wind came up the exit belt, and we both felt a physical push to the side, as if someone or something was in a super hurry to leave. The whoosh of air and physical push made us both look at each other and sort of freaked us out. Our friend Stephanie also had a similar occurrence happen to her and her husband Brian outside the mansion with another guest. Here's what they had to say about this.
We were waiting for our party to be called. And so outside the mansion, there's that little ramp area where you go into the main entrance. And the ramp area has you to one side. And so if you lean over the fence, you can actually see the pet cemetery that's behind the mansion. And there's like a little concrete walkway there. And we've noticed over the years, cast members going back and forth between that little walkway. So we're there, and there's another guest that we didn't know. She was also in line with us. And so we're just, the three of us are just chatting, waiting for us to be called. And as we're chatting, a white figure rushed past the three of us on that little walkway. It rushed past us, but then it disappeared. So we never saw it reappear further down the walkway. And it was in white, wasn't it?
I just saw the blur.
You saw a blur?
And I saw the ruffling of the leaves.
Yeah, and
the lady behind me saw that too.
Yeah.
She saw it before me. She goes, what was that?
She even said, what was that? Yeah. And then we started hearing footsteps.
Yeah.
Like a minute or two later. We started hearing running is what we heard.
Also, at the main entrance, Stephanie had this encounter.
This happened about, I want to say, about 2001, 2002. And it's late at night. It's 11 o'clock. The park is closing. And I'm standing in front of the Haunted Mansion, in front of the main entrance. And it was one of those nights where there really wasn't a lot of people. And I'm admiring the architecture. And as I'm admiring the architecture, somebody came up behind me to push me out of the way as if they were in a hurry to get to the attraction. The person pushed me so hard, it actually kind of turned me to one side. I got really mad. I turned back around to yell at the person, hey, and I look behind me. There's no one around me for at least 300 feet. And I know the difference between getting pushed and stumbling on your own sneakers. And I was definitely pushed. So I look back on at the front entrance of the mansion, and here comes the cast member. She's coming down the walkway to close the gate. And she says, hey, we're about to close. Do you want to be the last guest on? And I said, no, thanks.
So something apparently has no body, has no shape, but has wind. It has the winds. I don't know. Sometimes that seems like that would be bad. Because I've had the winds in the mansion. And anyway, let's not go there.
Moving on.
Dave also mentioned an incident with the giggling children at Unload. He went on to say, I have several times been working Unload late shift nights where we'd walk down groups in the ER, that's the expanding room, the elevator. With that, big gaps in groups at Unload that would space a good 10 minutes or so. I'd sit on the short wall at Unload waiting for the next group and would start to hear giggling, laughing children, stand up and walk to the front of the Unload belt to find nobody. This was always on late night shifts when it was very empty. Also at the Unload area, and this is one that's been relayed by a lot of cast members, I was standing on the load belt looking in the mirror, and guess we're getting off the attraction when I noticed a child, looked like a smaller child with a red hat, or hoodie sometimes, because I saw this multiple times, pulled down over his eyes, crying. And I would, of course, get concerned, and as soon as I could stop unloading guests for a few seconds, I would turn around and go down that way, and there was nobody there. This happened to multiple cast members over the years, and actually this is something I have seen online, where cast members even today still see this. It's usually a crying child standing at the end of the belt, and then they turn around and there's nobody there.
I'm curious, can you hear the child crying as well, or do you just see him crying in the mirror?
You just see him crying in the mirror. There's no sound.
Ooh, that's even creepier.
Yeah. I believe at least once I saw that when I was alone down there, which is even more creepy, because I remember standing after that happened up against the walkway going, I'm going to just stand where I can see both directions right now. So that was another one of those repetitive ones that would happen occasionally to multiple people. Grad nights are one of those days when it's going to be quiet around the mansion, and a couple of incidents happened to me and a friend of mine, Rick. One time we were working grad night, and I was the lead, and Rick was working what was basically security in the ride. Again, with his flashlight, his walkie-talkie, and the remote to stop the attraction. He is inside the little cupboard, I guess you could call it, or closet at the top of this stairway on the left, across from the endless hallway and the suit of armor, looking out, just watching for kids lighting up things that they shouldn't be lighting up inside the Haunted Mansion, if you see what I mean.
Which would be anything.
Literally. Which would be anything, really. But he was standing in there. In that little closet is nothing but a ladder that goes up so that people can access the upper areas for lighting and such. So he's standing in there and feels a hand on his shoulder. And he turns around and goes, "Ha, very funny. There's nothing but a wall there." He came running back down and went up to the lead office and told me about it, and didn't really want to go back in the attraction much that night. So later on, in another grad night, we start hearing a sound coming from underneath the track. Well, if you start hearing a sound as a lead or anybody on that attraction, many times it's going to be a bad road wheel or a piece of metal that is loose, like a cover plate between vehicles. So he calls me and says, "Hey, meet me down here underneath the seance circle, because there's something weird going on down here." So I go down there and meet him, and from under the track, we can hear what sounds like somebody taking a piece of wood and hitting the metal bents or the supports for the track, like bink, 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 but in sequence, like following the path or the motion of the vehicle. So we go back down underneath to listen for it or look for it, because I think maybe there's something going on down here that we need to be aware of, and I hear it again. And this time only louder, but nearly right in front of us. And so I'm looking in there with my flashlight, and then about, 15 seconds later, we hear it again, going in the opposite direction. Bink, 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 bink. We're like, okay, we're out of here. Yeah, that was another one of those, it sounds mechanical, but it's not. Cast member John, that I used to work with, who is still a current cast member over at Disney California Adventure, thank you again, John, for giving us some information on this, was working at Mansion and had an incident that was, in his words, it's a you have to be there experience. Several cast members every year say the same thing, and I'm going to throw my hand up. This happened to me at the expanding room one time. They are spieling to their guests in the elevator, and while looking straight ahead at the guests, but out of the corner of their eye, they see someone coming towards them. They assume it's a rotation or a break. When they turn to the left, no one is there. Now, in my incident, somebody actually came up next to me and in my ear whispered, "It's a bump," which meant I need to move on to the next position and continue the rotation around. Well, I end up down at the load area, and there's nobody in the elevator now because the bump never came. Was it a cast member? No. Was it a guest? Definitely not. They wouldn't know what to say. But somebody or something likes to pretend that they're a cast member and bump cast members to the next position. Love that one. Cast member Kristen had an issue one time at the seance circle on the cameras. And also, something interesting that a guest did. Let's listen to Kristen.
I think anybody who worked on the Haunted Mansion has a story of some sort where things just were a little weird. Well, I didn't have any of the real close encounters, like feeling like a ghost walked through you. I do remember there was one time when we'd first gotten the cameras installed throughout the attraction, and we would get notification if there was like movement happening where it shouldn't, and just seeing the screens, like looking up, and in the seance circle looking up and just seeing pixels everywhere, like there was something moving, running around in there. We didn't hear any doors go off. The people working at load and unload didn't have anybody go past them. And we sent someone walking through the ride and there was nothing there. So it's very likely that any of the ghosts really loved messing with us once we got the cameras installed. Well, in this one, it's not necessarily a ghost story. It's still kind of creepy. One summer when I was working there, I think it was after Disneyland's 40th anniversary, we had these guests coming through the line, commenting on the new feature we had added to the queue. And anybody who knows Disney, they theme out everything, so there's always something to look at and kind of keep you interested while you're waiting in line. But we're like, we didn't add anything. Oh, yes, no, there's definitely something there. It's new. We haven't seen it before. That's a great touch. And we brushed it off, and finally we just went and checked it out. And a family had left an urn in the queue. But they hadn't just left the urn. They had also scattered some of the remains of the person who was in the urn in the planter. And so God bless the guests. They just thought it was a new Disney little touch. And for the rest of us, we're like, oh, this is someone's grandma being laid to rest in the Haunted Mansion. And at that point, we cleared the queue, called Custodio, who called Hazmat. They took care of finding Grandma a more appropriate final resting place. But we decided to keep the urn, and at least while I was still working there, her urn remained in the lead desk area.
In a way, that's kind of sweet that they did that. And I love that they kept the urn in the office. That's very nice.
It is, but it's still just creepy and makes me wonder if some of the ghosts that are in the mansion have come from people doing that with their loved ones. Or their not-so-loved ones. I don't know.
I don't think that's how it works. But at the same time, for legal reasons, don't do that.
Yeah, that's definitely not a thing to do at the Haunted Mansion.
Or anywhere. At Disney, please no.
Cast member Lori, who used to be a lead at the mansion, hi Lori, thank you again for donating this story, said, my first year at Haunted Mansion, I worked the night shifts and usually closed as a ride operator. I enjoyed the ride and would volunteer to walk behind the last occupied doom buggy as we cycled the last guests off the ride. One night, as the guests went up the ramp to exit the ride, I continued to the service area, that's the lead area, where cast member Kathy, the closing lead, was. She was finishing up the day's paperwork. As the closing lead of the attraction, she would call security to report the ride was clear of guests, then turn on the work lights, and finally walk through the ride to make a visual check of the ride after the day's operation. On this night, I asked if I could accompany her. I was new and loved to see all the cool stuff with the lights on. Just before we left the service area and began to walk through, a terrifying, curdling scream was heard by both of us. It came from somewhere inside the ride. It was not on a ride mic. The work lights were on, the ride sounds were off. Kathy and I looked at each other very surprised. As far as we knew, we were the only ones on the ride. Kathy remarked that was not normal. She had never heard that before on the attraction. She called security and reported it. Then she said, okay, are we walking the ride really fast? Which we certainly did. There was nothing out of place. What it was, no idea. But that is the only ghost story I have. As you know, I later was lead on the Haunted Mansion and never experienced anything like that again, although one dull night, I did get a report from one of my cast members that little tissue ghosts were drifting down on the load area. Lori was famous for making little rubber band Kleenex ghosts and having them mysteriously start to show up down at the load area. Used to love that with Lori. Thanks again, Lori, for donating that story. Lastly, cast member Jason.
And I'm just going to jump in here before you say this. This is a bad idea. So if you're a cast member at Disney, don't do this. Yeah. That's your public service announcement.
Jason told us, I also went and participated in a seance after hours at the mansion service area.
Again, bad idea.
Yeah. Ouija boards are a bad idea in a known haunted area. I'm just going to say that. Or
anywhere. They're not toys.
He goes on to say, I remember some cast members getting spooked when the letters on the Ouija board spelled G-O-D in response to, who are we communicating with? Somehow I have a feeling it wasn't really God.
When someone asks you if you're a god, you say, yes!
Again, thank you, Jason, for donating that story to us from the Haunted Mansion. So that's all the stories we have from the Haunted Mansion. We're going to look over a little further down the road in New Orleans Square to Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates is one of those places that a lot of people have had ghost stories over the years, and if you look online, you'll see stories about hearing Walt Disney cough, or smelling cigar smoke, or cigarette smoke,
or snoring.
Or snoring, yeah, in different places. For me, when I worked Pirates, boat storage was the place that I dreaded going to on my own. Every time I would go to boat storage to pull a boat off, I just had this feeling of, almost like this feeling of darkness or dread in there. I could never really pinpoint it. There were lights on in there, but usually the work lights, of course, were off because you don't want to be able to see that from inside the attraction. Well, one afternoon when I'm down there pulling off a boat that I think somebody had yacked in, as I recall, and those were always fun ones, I walked into boat storage, and as you look to your left, there were doors, like a boat elevator, and exit doors, or a door where they could pull the boats out of the attraction. As I'm looking at the doors, something got between me and the door so dark that it cut out all of the sunlight coming in from around the cracks of that door. It was so dark I could not see through it. And then, yet a few seconds later, I could see through it again. So something was not right that day. And yes, the big feeling of dread came over me again as I quickly ran back out of that boat storage area and pulled the boat off, and then went back in and lowered the curtain and ran back into the attraction because something was really off that day. There were a lot of cast members I talked to back then that would hear, like Sue said, Walt snoring in the transition tunnel.
And the reasons for this, which I just love, I love the backstory on this because when Pirates of the Caribbean was being built at Disneyland, it was in Walt's last days. It is one of the last attractions he personally oversaw. He was suffering from lung cancer and would often take a shorter day and take a break in the middle of the day to rest and nap. And down in that transition tunnel, it's one of the first places of Pirates that was finished because it is under the railroad tracks. So they had to complete that first. So he had a little space down there that he would go and take naps. And I just love that there are cast members, even to this day, who can hear Walt snoring or smell that cigar smoke once in a while. I think that's so cool.
So now we're going to walk outside the Mansion of Pirates and look across the way at Tom Sawyer Island. Now, this is an interesting one that has been reported for years by both security and the Phantasmic Shuttle cast members that are on the rafts at night. I have actually seen this once from the land side, from near Bear Country or Critter Country, looking over to Tom Sawyer Island when it was closed. And this is the report of a child running across the island at night. Now, there's been many different types of reports on this, but I talked to other cast members in the day, both security and attractions, who would see a child running across the island, and security would go over to check, and there was nobody there. So this was an interesting one that actually happened to me one time as well. Right outside of Pirates of the Caribbean are several stores, one of which used to be called One of a Kind. It's right there on the corner by the entrance of Pirates, Well, downstairs in that area is a basement area that has a lot of, how do we put that? Interesting things that happen. Our friend Steven, from a few episodes back, had something happen to him.
The basement of inside the one-of-a-kind shop, my friend, I used to call her Miss Addie, for short for attitude. We were in the basement, the Norland Square basement, and that's where we kept storage for a lot of things, like the giant perfume bottles for the perfume shop, various antiques. Maybe that's why it was haunted, the antiques. Anywho, I would be in the shop working, and the basement is literally, there's a very steep stairway that goes down to the basement, and that's where we kept most of the items for New Orleans Square. So I'm in a one-of-a-kind shop, and I'm working on something, and then all of a sudden you hear this tinking noise, this tink, 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 like glass clinking. And I would look up, and I thought it was maybe just a kid, touching on one of because we had Fabergé eggs in there, and I thought it was a little kid touching on the glass. And I would look up, and it would stop. I'm like, okay, there's nothing there. I don't get it. And then just go back to doing my work, cleaning and whatnot. Then I'd hear tink, 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 tink. And I'd turn around, and it would stop. So then I'm walking by, and I hear tink, 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 tink. And inside is one of the eggs, and the little stand that it's on is tapping on the glass. And it's at that point that I just said, okay, it is 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, well, it is 10 o'clock at night, and I'm tired. So maybe it's a small earthquake, and I'm not feeling it, or maybe it's vibration from Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't know. That's how I explained it away. I asked this woman named Jody, who was the A cast member of the store and keeping the store. And she said, oh, there's a lot of strange happenings going on here. And I'm like, what do you mean strange happenings? One day I'm down in the basement with Anna, and we're trying to wrap this capodiamantes. They were these ornate plaster chandeliers that had these leaves on it, and you can see the thumbprints from the artist and everything. And they would ship them in from New Orleans. I was putting together this one particular lamp, and it got strange vibes from it. We're putting it together when all of a sudden we had these giant tins that we would put the swords in for Pirates of the Caribbean. All the little plastic swords. We would put them in these giant metal, brass vases that we would just stick the swords in. Well, the brass vase was on its shelf near the bottom because it was kind of heavy, so it was on the bottom shelf. And we were talking, and all of a sudden we hear, bang! And it comes rolling down the hallway, makes a turn, and comes right next to us and stops.
Wow.
And Anna and I look at each other, and we damn near killed each other trying to be first, getting back upstairs to get out of the basement.
Wow.
I mean, we both looked at each other like, that's it, we're out of here.
So now let's jump over to Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland's got some interesting ones, and actually, Sue actually has a story that's related to this one. But let's talk about Space Mountain. Space Mountain is one of those ones that has been, I guess because it's a pyramid shape. I don't know.
It's a pyramid. It's literally built for ghosts.
Yeah, it's just odd. And I talked to several attraction cast members back in the 90s and early 2000s about this, where they would have reports or would see on a monitor a guest that's not there. He's been labeled by a lot of different cast members as Mr. One Way, or, again, that maintenance worker. He's been reported by a lot of guests, and where a guest would go on the attraction by themselves and another guest would get in with them, but by the time they get to the end of the attraction, that guest is gone. There's nobody there sitting in the seat next to them. There's also had been reports years ago, when I was first talking to cast members about this, of a guest that would apparently be outside of their restraint and screaming. So another story that's similar to this had guests reacting to something that could not be seen on the monitor or physically, but would be described as a faceless maintenance worker or something of that nature screaming at them as they're going up the very first lift in Space Mountain. Now, cast members can see that lift just by looking to the left, basically. And the Belts cast member, or the person doing the weighing and the checking the bars, can also see that lift. Wouldn't see anything, but they would have those reports coming back from guests. Another very odd one. The Space Mountain locker rooms, which were right on the back of the mountain, were often reported as having voices and hearing doors open and close when there's nobody else there. And Sue, I believe you actually had an experience here, didn't you?
I did. When I was working there on the college program, I worked in foods over at Critter Country, and my locker room was quite conveniently in the Space Mountain locker rooms, which, if you're familiar with Disneyland, is nowhere near Critter Country. But that's where the locker rooms were, and I had gone back after a shift. It was just me and a girl that I worked with. We were up there in the locker rooms. At the time, you could not go home in your costume. You had to fully change out of your costume and take it back down to costuming before you left. And so we were in the process of doing that. I was on one side of the locker bank, and she was on the other side. My locker door slammed shut. I kind of pulled back to see, like, if she was trying, like, pulling a prank or something and had run over and slammed it. She did not. She was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "That wasn't me." And I looked out into the hall, like the end of the lockers, and I saw somebody walking down toward the door to exit, and they left, but the door never opened. They just walked through it. Yeah, so that happened.
Oddly enough, when I worked in merchandise back in the turn of the century, that sounds so long ago now, but back in 99 and 2000. Ooh, in the 1900s. There was a few times where I would work Star Trader. Well, Star Trader, of course, is the store right there by the exit of Space Mountain that has stairways that go up into the old People Mover tunnel. And one of those exit doors for People Mover actually came into the fourth floor of the Star Trader's stockroom. Well, I was working over at Star Trader and was asked to work the plush wall. So at one point, we had sold several of the plushes, and I needed to go up to the fourth floor to get replacements for the plush wall. So I went up, opened the door, and as I opened the door, I saw what looked like a female cast member's back walking away from me, and then turned to the right down one of the walkways that had merchandise on both sides. So I walked in and said, "Oh, hey," and walked over and turned into that same walkway, and there was nothing there but a blank wall. At which point I grabbed what I needed, ran downstairs, and obviously looked a fright, because the other cast members were like, "Uh-oh, what did you see?" And I explained it to them. They said, "Uh-huh, that happens all the time." Well, apparently that same access door right there in the People Mover area, another maintenance worker had been seen over and over and over again in the Space Mountain tunnel for People Mover on the monitor. Well, back in the day when I was collecting these stories from cast members that had worked People Mover for quite a while, it was before they put in the pressure plates that if you step on now on certain attractions like dark rides will shut the ride off, including Haunted Mansion has those now. But they would see this maintenance worker in the camera and hit a ride stop, and nobody would be there. Other times that exit door would be opened and closed, and on the monitor there's nobody there. And in that same area, many guests have reported, mostly female guests, have reported, back when People Mover was an attraction, that they would have their hair pulled hard enough to like jerk their head back from outside of the People Mover car. So yeah, there's something spooky going on in Tomorrowland. Space Mountain, the old P Mover tunnel, Something weird, something wicked this way comes. So over the years, as I was doing research for the book that I talked about that Colin and I were working on, we had picked up other stories from Main Street about the Candy Palace basement where things would fall off shelves and people would be touched. And I worked the Emporium complex, so I got to go into the Emporium stockroom quite often, and things were just a little off there too. And a lot of cast members I talked to when I worked there would hear their names being called, or they would see ghostly figures just walking through the stockroom through walls. So something's going on there too. But let's head over to California Adventure and talk about the Tower of Terror. So the Tower of Terror has several ghost stories from over the years. We've been talking to our friend Brian, who is a cast member still in California Adventure and who worked Tower from when it was still Twilight Zone, and had an interesting thing happen to him at the load area. Let's listen to Brian.
Well, I would say about 12 years ago, I was at the bottom far left as you're going inside the Alpha area and doing opening procedures. And when we go into the cab, which is where the elevator is, and we have to do a check. And one of the checks is for the emergency stop. We open up the panel because it's a closed panel. We open the panel, make sure it's pulled out all the way. And it was. I closed it up. I walked back in. And then all of a sudden I hear the alarm going off, which I knew the distinctive sound of an e-stop going off, which is an emergency stop. And then they said, person who was working in the tower position said, hey, you got a problem with your emergency stop there. So I went in there and it was pushed in. And it's what they call a mushroom stop. It cannot just go by itself. And if I would have accidentally pushed it in before I closed the panel, it would have went off right then. But it didn't. So somehow when the panel was closed, it was physically pushed in when I was stepping out of the vestibule area. And then to top it off, a day later in the exact same spot, I was dispatching at Lower Alpha, and there was a gate where you had a fake spiral staircase. And there's a little latch on there. And the latch was always closed. Well, that thing by itself, I saw it open up. And I was thinking, okay. So I closed it, put the latch on, and did everything I can without opening the latch to see if I could get it to open. And it wouldn't. We have air conditioning, but that's not enough to open that thing. It had to be physically pushed open. And I actually saw that thing open. I'm thinking, wow, okay. And that was like a day after the other incident happened.
Talking to our friend Stephanie from earlier in this episode, she was there as a guest once, and this is what happened to her.
A long time ago when Tower of Terror opened, basically from its opening to its close, I used to go to Tower of Terror a lot, an awful lot. And when you get really friendly with some of the cast members, and one cast member in particular, I used to like to talk with him, and we would talk in the hallways and whatnot. And instead of writing, I would just talk with the cast member. And then one night he had to do his rounds, and so I just kind of stayed in one of the hallways waiting for him to come back so that we could talk some more. And Tower of Terror back then, this was like 2005, used to get really dark. They used to really lower the lights. And so I'm standing there in the dark, and all of a sudden there's a pair of feet right next to me, pair of black shoes. And I thought my friend had come back so that we could talk. And so I start talking, and I'm looking at the feet and I'm talking. And as I look up, there's nobody there next to me. And I look back and those feet are gone. And then I look down at the end of the hallway and here comes my friend. And that really freaked me out. And I even asked him, were you just here a second ago? And he says, no. And then he even said, oh, did you see me? Evidently, there's a phantom bellhop here at the Tower of Terror that looks just like me. And so that was really freaky.
Brian also works over at Animation,
So if you're not familiar with the animation building at Disney California Adventure, it is quite extensive. There's lots of different rooms, but one of the things that you can do is to do sort of a personality profile. You answer different questions by touching a screen inside a book in the Beast Library, and by the choices that you make, it shows you what Disney character you link to. So that's sort of the setup for this. That'll get you going.
One more time, let's listen to Brian.
Well, when I was at the Beast Library one morning doing opening procedures, one of the books was answering questions by itself, and there was nobody there. And I went to go look to see what the photo was, and it stopped at that point. And I wanted to see, what character was I going to pick? But there was nothing there to trigger it that I saw. But it was just going off. It was just answering the questions.
So also at California Adventure at the Hyperion Theater, because, every theater has to have a good ghost story. That little light bulb that's on the stage when they close every night is still called, I believe, the Ghost Light?
It is called the Ghost Light. At the Hyperion, which is actually right next door to Tower of Terror, so I guess that makes sense that they would congregate. I don't know. But I did used to work at the Hyperion Theater when we did Aladdin, the Musical Spectacular, and I never saw anything. There were stories circulating that things had happened. My only experience was, I believe it was the second position. There were 4 different positions backstage that you could be in, and one of the positions you had to literally run all the way up all the flights of stairs, all the way to the top, so that you could help load Aladdin and Jasmine onto the flying carpet. So every once in a while, when you were running, you would usually be chasing after Jasmine. You'd be following her up. And just every once in a while, you would have Jasmine in front of you, you right behind her, and then someone following you. You could hear footsteps running along with you. Never even caused me to have a weird feeling on the back of my neck. It just always made me laugh that there was some ghost out there that wanted to run up all those stairs.
Probably a really, really buff ghost.
Probably, yeah.
So at Disneyland, if you look online, you're going to find stories about other haunted locations, such as the Matterhorn, the Carousel Theater Interventions.
And a lot more Space Mountain stories.
A lot more Space Mountain stories. One of our favorite stories, however, is the apartment for Walt and the lamp in the window.
If you are not familiar with the story, when Disneyland was under construction, Walt had an apartment constructed over the firehouse on Main Street. It is still there. He used it when he was on park if he needed to go take a break or take a rest. Anytime he was in the apartment, they made sure to have the lamp in the window on so that people would know that Walt was on park. And since he passed away, they have kept that lamp burning all the time. They keep it all the time because Walt is always with us. And there have been stories that anytime the lamp has accidentally gone out or the bulb has burned out, that it would somehow manage to come back on all by itself. And they would turn it off so they could change it and it would pop back on. And I just think that's so cool that, Walt is always there.
Yeah, maybe Walt's still looking at the park. I wonder if Walt would be proud of Disneyland today. I still think he would be.
I think he would be as well. I think the parks are headed in a good direction. I think the company is a little controversial right now, and I think the parks are a little separate from that. That's just in my own vision, but...
Agreed.
So this has just been a little fun way that we like to celebrate Halloween, because how better to celebrate Halloween than with a Disney ghost story?
Whoa.
So we hope that you had fun with it too, even if it's not totally your thing. Maybe we give you something to think about. I don't know.
Yeah, as we said, these stories were either first or second hand. So again, take them with a grain of salt. Believe them, don't believe them. I don't care. I saw this stuff. It's real.
We're not liars, folks.
Anyway,
Storytellers, yes. Liars, no.
Yeah, very good, very good. Next year, we plan on doing a Walt Disney World version of the Halloween special. So join us again for episode 95 or whatever it's going to be. I
we
don't
have
even
not
know.
done the math on that.
It'll be a ways, but look for our Halloween episode in 2024 to include Walt Disney World stories.
And if you have a Disney ghost story, we would love to hear it. Again, not something you scoured on the internet, something that happened to you personally or someone you know. We'd love to hear those. We'd love to collect them. So as you know, we're not really Halloween people, but the one way that we do love to celebrate Halloween is with our friend Andy, former Imagineer, who was on an episode early in our season. And he, every year, does something spectacular at his house. If you are anywhere in the Los Angeles area, anywhere in SoCal, you need to check this out. I'm going to post a graphic on our social media so that you can see the exact address. This year is a creepy tiki theme. It's going to be phenomenal. And he is in Thousand Oaks. The address will be on the photo that we're linking. Please, please, if you are anywhere in the area, go check it out and let us know how it is, because we're not going to make it. A very special thank you to all those who contributed stories for today's episode. Brian, Colin, Dave, Jason, John, Kristen, Lori, Stephanie, Stephen. We could not have done this without you. Thanks so much.
Before we go, we'd like to give a big shout out to our social media coordinator, Riley Piper, audio engineers Joey Humphrey and Paul Trett, and logo designer Evan Piper. Our theme music composer is Jason Patrick Rowan, and is licensed through Pond 5. And of course, thank you, Phoenicians.
Thank you, Phoenicians. And don't forget to rate, review, like, and subscribe. It really does help other people find us. You can find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
The Epcotian Adventure is a $1,000 brunch production. Thanks for joining us today for episode 40 of the Epcotian Adventure. I'm Rod.
And I'm Sue.
And we'll see you in line.
Is that weird? That was kind of weird.